What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast, the preview edition for the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. We're through the wild card round. Wild card weekend is finished. I spent a good chunk of the podcast last week complaining about there being one Monday game, and the NFL heard that and decided that they needed to be two Monday games. So there we are with that. But yeah, no, it was an exciting wild card weekend. A wild card weekend filled with upsets, some upsets that were like, okay, that makes some sense, and then another upset that you and I did not see coming at all and had no idea that was going to happen. So we'll talk maybe a little bit about that and then preview the divisional round. I'm going to do all of that with my good friend, the one, the only, Mr. Rich Hribar. How you doing, Rich?
Doing good. Here we are, this weekend, and then we only have 3 games left, so we're running out of finite NFL games. Hopefully the games are closer. It was a good DFS and betting weekend still, but hopefully the games are, from a watchability perspective, are a little bit closer and tighter this weekend.
Yeah, it was not an exciting week. I what I do when I'm watching a game that's boring is I play my chess.com app, and I got in a lot of chess matches over the football weekend because there's a lot of garbage time in the second half. Some of those games did get interesting though, like the Bills and Steelers got interesting. Cowboys and Packers got oddly interesting at the end. Weirdly interesting enough that they had to put Aaron Jones back in at the end. And so yeah, some of that kind of got exciting, but yeah, it was not a
I
great
try to get
weekend.
you on
I'm
these
hopeful.
live bets, man. I try to get you in these live bet streets, man. You got to hammer this stuff.
Call Greg Abbott and tell Greg Abbott to allow Texans to bet, and I'll live bet with you. Like, it's the most nonsense thing in the world is that we can't bet and we can't buy alcohol before. I think they actually changed that. I think it's like 10:30 now on Sunday mornings. It used to be noon. In Texas, you couldn't buy alcohol before noon on a Sunday morning. Now I think it's like 10 or 10:30. But either way, those are the two
Yeah.
things we need.
We're in
There
there.
was actually
We're in like our Slack thread. Like we're like sharing you like live hits, me and Warren, and you guys are just you can't even get a taste of it.
can't do a thing about it. I was really excited during one of the last election runs, like the local election runs. There was a proposition allowing them to build like these mega casinos in Texas. So they have table games and all that stuff. And I believe that passed. And if that happens, I'm going to be a much, much poorer man because the only thing standing between me and playing craps every weekend is the fact that I have to drive 5 or 6 hours to do it. If I only have to drive 30 minutes to do it, we're in, baby. It's going to be craps weekend all throughout the spring. But let's actually talk about that Packers game for a second because I think that was the upset. That was the one that I really didn't see coming. I know that you didn't really see that coming. When I was making my playoff fantasy lineups, I did play Aaron Jones in some of those where you have to, leave out a couple teams. You only get one player per team. I played
Yeah.
Aaron Jones a couple of those. Unfortunately, I played Jaden Reed in my main one, and that didn't go well. But not because I thought the Packers were going to advance, just because I thought they could have a fine game and a good game environment. And, that would be what it is. But they didn't just advance; they crushed the Cowboys. Jordan Love came into that game struggling against pressure and then absolutely destroyed it with the Cowboys. We saw the same thing from CJ Stroud in a game we were worried about. And I'm wondering if with these kind of young quarterbacks, just kind of like as a jumping off point here, is this just we saw them play well for 1 week, or is this kind of one of those things where maybe these young quarterbacks are just really taking a step, and that this is something we need to be wary of this week because both of these teams, again, the Texans and the Packers, are big underdogs this week in games against number one seeds. And I think we're looking at it the same way we were looking at the Packers last week. And are we underestimating maybe the growth of these young quarterbacks?
Well, first of all, credit the Cowboys who just epically knew how to fail this year. Like when the
Wild.
Cowboys failed this year, they went all in. They did not half step
Yeah.
us, right. Like they crashed and burned every week. Like they just, when they lost, like the Dolphins game was the only game like they kept like moderately close. But like when the
Long
Cowboys
live, long live the Cardinals. That Josh Dobbs Cardinals performance live long in our memories against the Cowboys. Thanks,
Yeah,
Josh.
I mean, the Cowboys knew how to fail this year. This team, like they got it out of the way early. I mean, down 27-0 at one point. Dak threw that pick six. I was sitting there with my son, and like he kind of looked at it as like, if they score, they could double dip before the half, and it could be like 2014. And then Dak threw that
Yeah.
pick six. I was like, yeah, it's over. We're done here. We're done here. Let's walk away. And it was probably really done anyways. You just try to talk yourself into like some of those things. Like I think
Yeah.
like, during the course like the Eagles-Bucks game too, like Eagles fans are probably talking themselves in. Like at one point it was like 16-9, and they're probably like, well, if we just do this, it's like, nah, man.
Yeah.
Like
If we
this,
just score before halftime, then we're back in this thing. Yeah.
but to your larger point, I mean, there definitely is like some element if you believe in those players, and I think we do believe in it at least Stroud, and I think Love has given us reason to be excited for the future too as well, that it could be a jumping off point. I'm still going to follow the larger sample we have though. Like we still have a larger sample where both of these guys have had issues with this under these circumstances. So until they start to regularly beat it from a betting perspective, from an analysis perspective, like I'm going to keep going to the larger sample. Like it's just the way it is. It's the way I operate. I'm an evidence-based player. I don't chase a lot of rainbows. And if it happens again, then so be it. Until that flips though, I'm going to be on the other side.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I do think that I'm going to be more willing to jump in earlier on a younger player with a less established track record if we see that switch, especially for someone like Stroud, who, I mean, Love is a young quarterback, but Love has been in the league for a long time, right? And so we have a little bit longer of a track record with him than we do with Stroud. With Stroud, especially with his draft capital and what we think of him as a player, when we start to see him make these adjustments, and it wasn't just last week, it was also against the Colts in the season finale. In 2 playoff games, we've seen him do this under pressure. Then I'm going to accept it a little bit faster. And that actually is a really good segue into our first game of the week, which is the Texans at the Ravens on Saturday afternoon. The only time that the Texans are allowed to play in the playoffs is on Saturday afternoon, early game on
Always.
Saturday. They're playing the Ravens. They are 9.5-point underdogs. As I mentioned, the total in that game is 43.5. I think kind of with these first 2 games, both of the Saturday games, I think one of the important takeaways is we saw some upsets last week. The Cowboys upset was a real upset. The Cowboys had the kind of point differential that would suggest that they are truly one of the elite teams, even if we didn't necessarily see that when they went up against other good teams. But when we're looking at the
It was the first
Ravens and when
home
we're
game they
looking at
lost in 2 years.
exactly, fair, exactly. So that was a true upset. When we're looking at the Ravens and 49ers, however, we're looking at teams that were truly dominant this year. These aren't just like this team has Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen has and the Bills have made a comeback. These are truly dominant teams, probably the 2 most dominant teams that we've seen all season. The Ravens scored 203 more points than their opponents. The 49ers have scored 193 more points than their opponents. And so while I'm saying, with Stroud and Love, I'm not going to write them off. I would be, again, very shocked if we don't see these 2 teams kind of move through this competition and move into the next round just based on how dominant they've been.
Yeah, and you look at the history of this, divisional round, like teams that have been heavy favorites have largely been successful, right? Since the NFL expanded to 32 teams, teams that are touchdown or more favorites in the divisional round are 60-20 overall.
Yeah.
You might get some there's definitely reason to take maybe the points on either of those teams or tease both of these teams down that play on Saturday. To cover the spread, but from an outright just losing this game perspective, they would be colossal upsets like all time for both of these teams, the Packers and Texans to win. They're probably building block games. Like you give both those teams get like the playoff win under their belt. The coach can say, hey, we even won a playoff game. Not even getting to the playoffs was a big deal. We actually won a playoff game and can build on that as we move forward. But seeing either of these teams lose, I think would be just absolutely massive. This Ravens defense has been so good the entire year. And, I just go back to a couple weeks ago when they faced the 49ers, a team that we'll, talk about just how dominant they've been. And they just absolutely erased them. The Rams are the only team that have like really had a quarterback performance of note against them, Matthew Stafford. So it's hard for me to say, like, I believe like Stroud's going to have, I think there is going to be reduction here. And for him to have the type of efficiency, like, is he going to throw a 75-yard screen pass for a touchdown in this game? I doubt it. I don't think so
You're
in this
waiting.
game.
You're waiting too close into the PFF Stroud controversy. You got to watch out there with
Yeah,
the
I
Screen
mean,
Pass talk.
it's just hard because Mike McDonald's been so good in this game, and even all the weird things like I wrote about in the worksheet about like the rookie quarterback stuff because Stroud's not necessarily like a token rookie quarterback, even though is one of the guys in the sample from week one. But I mean, Stroud has been not as great as a quarterback on the road. He's facing one of the better defenses in the NFL. He hasn't had a good performance against the good defense on the road all season. So it's just like another obstacle he has to like keep knocking down. And he's kicked them down so far to this point. But I would expect the Texans to have like a limited or muted offensive performance. And they're down so many guys at this point. It's literally just Nico Collins left as the only wide receiver standing.
Yeah, I mean, even Noah Brown, you're trying to get excited about Noah Brown. He's on injured reserve. He played 4 snaps last week. So we're into the Xavier Hutchinson and John Mechie land at wide receiver. I do think it's interesting to watch what the Texans decide to do here with Bobby Slowick. Warren Sharp actually wrote an article a few weeks ago ahead of the Dolphins game talking about how he thought that and for Warren to say he thinks that teams should lean into the run, that's saying something. Warren is generally not interested in that, but he thinks against the Ravens, one of the things you should do is lean into the run early and get them out of their light boxes. Because when you get the Ravens out of the light boxes, their pass defense plummets precipitously, very, very quickly. And it so happens their offense is good, and they've been leading for so much this season. You had a stat 79% of their second half snaps they've been leading, something like that, that they haven't really been put in these positions. But maybe the Texans can come out, try to establish Singletary. Their run game hasn't worked all season. It at least has been better with Singletary, and maybe that's a way for them to attack this defense. But yeah, if they're just going to come out and try to throw into this defense, we've seen time and time again that even if Marlon Humphrey doesn't play, that's probably still not going to work out for them.
Yeah, I think, as I said, I expect a muted offensive performance. I think Nico Collins is going to have his targets, available, but like it's really hard when the Ravens. You look at their opponents that they faced this year, and there just haven't been spike weeks. They just don't give up spike weeks to basically any position. There's been a couple running back performances, but they're elite running backs that have also gotten them. Like Kyron Williams, Christian McCaffrey, like Devin Achane, like this is like these are guys that are rungs above what we believe Devin Singletary is.
Yeah, that's fair. But are they rungs above late season Devin Singletary?
Yes,
Because I know we have
100%.
I know we have Dehember. What are we going to call the Singletary?
I don't know.
Because
Yeah.
it is give Singletary the ball in January, and he's gonna be good for you. On the other side, I mean, this sets up as a really good spot for Lamar Jackson. This Texans defense, although it is very good against running back runs, they give up quarterback runs, they give up when the Texans don't get pressure, they give up a lot of passing yards. Everything about this matches up for Jackson, who has been outstanding over the second half of the season. I don't really think we need to talk a ton about Lamar Jackson, but
Right.
it is at least worth mentioning that even in terms of Lamar Jackson, this is a particularly good spot for him.
Yeah, absolutely. The Ravens didn't have like a huge increase in raw passing volume under Todd Monken, but everything has structurally changed. Like their early down pass rate, their pass rate over station, everything's gone up under Monken this year. Like you said, when you lead for 80% of your second half snaps, you ain't gonna have a lot of raw pass volume. It's just the way the NFL works. Even the most pass heavy teams are eventually gonna start, winding down clock and kind of call off the dogs a bit. And that's what the Ravens basically have done this season, even with their kind of backfield, kind of in constant motion. But yeah, it's a great spot for Lamar Jackson. I mean, we've seen the Texans, they're predicated on pressure all season. When they haven't pressured the opposing quarterback, I mean, they're 27th in completion rate allowed. They're 25th in yards per pass attempt allowed. Also, when you get pressure on Lamar Jackson, he's averaged the most yards per pass attempt under pressure than any quarterback this season. He's only thrown one interception under pressure this season. He actually has his lowest interception rate since his MVP season in 2019. You talked about the Texans. They're 28th in rushing points allowed to quarterbacks from a fantasy perspective. They're also bad against play action. One of the worst in the NFL against play action. 31st in yards per pass attempt, 30th in completion rate. Obviously, Lamar's been one of the better play action quarterbacks since he entered the league. He's 4th this year in yards per pass attempt. So everything does set up well for the Ravens again, playing at home.
But other than that, everything's great.
Yeah, other than that. The hardest thing with the Ravens is just from a
Uh,
DFS perspective. You got this kind of backfield that we know Gus Edwards like is touchdown or bust. Like Justice Hill's made some plays. What do they do? Does Dalvin Cook do anything in this game? And does Mark Andrews plays? And how much does Mark Andrews play? Right? Like those are like all the things in the
yeah.
air.
Mark Andrews practiced in full on Wednesday. He is going to play in this game. I feel very, very confident about that. We recorded this on Thursday morning, so I don't know what his Thursday practice was, obviously. But yeah, I assume he's going to he's going to play in this game. I do think questioning how much is fair, but he's going to play in leverage situations,
Right.
and that alone for him is enough. Because if he can get, four catches, but two of them are touchdowns because he's playing in the red zone, and this Ravens offense is able to score as much as we expect them to score, then that's enough for him in DFS. That's enough for him in playoff competitions. So I actually think that this is still a very good spot for Andrews against a team that has funneled targets, towards tight ends. And obviously Lamar Jackson doesn't need a reason to target Mark Andrews. He likes to do that anyway. I am very interested. You brought up in your worksheet preview for this game. By the way, Rich has written a comprehensive preview of all four of these games. Massive, great previews over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. You can go and check those out. In order to do that, though, you need to be a subscriber to our playoff package. You can do that if you use the code playoffs. You can get 50% off either our weekly or our full postseason package. Head over to sharpfootballanalysis.com and check that out. You'll get Rich's previews, his worksheet previews. You'll get Warren Sharp's betting recommendations, all of that as part of that package. So go and check that out and make sure you read the preview for this. But in that preview, you brought up Zay Flowers and kind of his splits with Andrews. And if Andrews is coming back and actually is going to play a reasonable amount, that could be bad news for Flowers.
Well, it's kind of double edged. He basically has a dead even sample: 262 routes with Andrews on the field, 259 routes with him off the field. Target share doesn't like take a huge change. He's targeted 19% of his routes with Andrews on the field, 22.4%. You get a little bit of a bump, but he has 0 end zone targets with Andrews on the field. He has 1 touchdown with Andrews on the field. So that's like kind of from a ceiling perspective. He does, interesting enough, get like a higher A dot. He gets like better quality of targets. We talk about the high cholesterol targets. He doesn't get the end zone targets though.
Which makes
But
it makes sense
yeah,
though that would
right.
happen, right? If Andrews isn't there, you can allow Flowers to work more down the field than taking a lot more of those kind of Andrews targets. So that usage split, when I look at usage splits, and especially if they're relatively small sample, 250 routes is not a ton. I try to think to myself, does this make sense? And everything that you just said makes a ton of sense with these two guys, and I would expect it to
Yeah,
continue.
and that happened when these teams played earlier in the year. Obviously it was his first career game, and the Ravens were doing different things. I mean, these teams played literally another year ago. They played like
Exactly.
he only had 2.8 air yards per target in that game. Yeah, and in Flowers in general is a guy that hasn't been a high ceiling player. From a DFS perspective, anyways. Even with Andrews playing, he's gone over 80 yards in the 2 games. So yeah, it makes it interesting. Maybe you chase like an Odell flyer if you're doing your Lamar stacks, or you just, like you said, you take Andrews where people are going to get reduced ownership, maybe be more scared to play him. But with this game being kind of the first game if you're doing the 4-gamer, there's not a lot to be like drawn to here.
Yeah, and people love to play the first game. They love to kind of stack the first game. They can see their name on top of the leaderboard. I've always kind of noticed you get a little bit more maybe rostership than it's only a couple percentage points, but it always seems like there's a little bit more than I thought there would be. I like the Odell call out because we talked about this several times throughout the season is that Odell Beckham wasn't playing a lot of snaps. He wasn't running a ton of routes, but when he was running routes, he was very often getting targeted.
Oh
And
yeah.
that worked out for him for like 2 or 3 weeks in a row, but then he hit a fallow period, which makes sense because his usage just wasn't there. I do think it's fair to assume that we're going to see that usage expand in the playoffs, that we're going to see him on the field more. It made sense for them, especially because he had some injury issues throughout the year, to limit him. I wonder if that governor is going to get taken off in the playoffs. Obviously, can't be sure about that. That's why Odell is certainly a flyer. And even if it does get taken off, he might not get a ton of targets. But I do think that there's opportunity here for Odell to become maybe not like 100% snap player, 100% route player, but maybe he's closer to, 75 and 80% that he has been throughout the season. And if that's the case, and we can continue to get targets per route the way that we have been this season, then Odell is suddenly a very good play in this matchup. And so I think that the Odell call out is really good there if you're looking for for somebody to stack with Lamar Jackson. The other game we have here on Saturday is the Packers at the 49ers. Christian McCaffrey has practiced in full all week. He's healthy. I think we don't need to worry about that anymore. But that does lead to concerns if you're the Packers and the Packers defense. You had a great stat in your preview for this game about if all of the 49ers, skill players, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, and Christian McCaffrey, when all of those guys are healthy, this offense is just unbeatable. It's unstoppable. The Packers defense has actually been playing pretty well the last 3 weeks. They've actually been doing, not bad. But against this 49ers offense, I don't really think it matters. Like, I just think that this 49ers offense is just going to buzzsaw everybody that they come against.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what the Packers did last week and how they were kind of able to adjust. They actually had the lowest pressure rate of any team in the wild card round. They blitzed way at a lower rate than they have this season. They just tried to drop back and play coverage and try to get the Dallas to check into runs. And that happened in the first half. Warren was going crazy, like tweeting about second half runs. If you just check our second down runs the Cowboys had, because Dak kept checking to runs because he kept getting looks to check into runs. And obviously Joe Barry can't do that here. You're not going to the thing is, what do you do? There are smarter people than me that that do this for a living. And how do you stop this? The 49ers, if you want them to check into runs, cool. They'll check into runs to Christian McCaffrey. Do you want to drop back and play zone? Well, cool. Then we've got, a guy like Deebo Samuel, who's absolutely just eviscerated near line of scrimmage targets when teams play heavy zone. You want to go back to your cover 3, cover 1 stuff? Well, guess what? Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle destroy cover 3 and cover 1. So what do you do? What's the answer? Your hope for the Packers is that you can just generate enough pressure on Brock Purdy that he can make enough mistakes, right? Just make enough mistakes to get you to hang around. And you can play ahead in this game. But that's really it, man. That's the story with this 49ers. They've been an absolute Death Star.
Pressure without blitzing. That is the key. If you get pressure without blitzing, then you at least have a chance. It's not a great chance. Brock Purdy still averages. Exactly. Brock Purdy still averages 8 yards an attempt when he's pressured without the blitz. It's a wild number, but he has thrown 5 interceptions in that situation. That's nearly half of his interceptions. It represents a quarter of the dropbacks that he's had. And so he certainly is more prone to throwing an interception whenever he's pressured and you still are dropping back in coverage. To be fair to the Packers, they are able to do that. They are one of the teams that can do that. I believe they're definitely top 5 in pressure rate without a blitz this season. And so that at least gives them an out. But really, that's what you're hoping for. And we talked about this during the 3-game kind of 49ers losing streak. We talked about how the offense was still awesome in those 3 weeks. Browns game, not so much, but the other 2 games they were. The only thing that was happening is that they were turning the ball over, and that was stopping drives, and that was limiting points, and that was really it. The offense was still great in those games, and so really all you're hoping for the Packers is that you can force some turnovers from Brock Purdy. Your offense, Jordan Love, can replicate what we saw last week, and maybe you're able to win a shootout. But that's really what
we talked about it with Flacco too. These games, they just get so magnified. The turnover battle is so huge in these playoff games. If you just can get the turnovers, that gives you the most fighting shot, right, to win these games. And we saw with Flacco, basically every game that happened over the weekend. You get those turnovers, you're in a good spot. If you have the better quarterback play between, you win. There was out of the 6 games, maybe the Goff Stafford game, maybe the better quarterback that day didn't win. But even then, it's you at least have an argument. Goff didn't play bad. But there was clear, stark difference between the quarterback play and the other 5 wins versus the other quarterback.
And a lot of it had to do with turnovers. Turnovers are such an important.
And the other thing I think that showed what mattered in the NFL is the off-ball linebacker might not be dead as we thought, the importance. We saw Miami missing Jerome Baker and his absence, what that felt. We saw what Matt LaFleur was able to do to the Cowboys. And, again, smarter people make money to do this. Matt LaFleur is one of them. And he realized a clear deficiency that the Cowboys had. Cowboys had no linebackers available to play. And what Matt LaFleur did was their 2 linebackers were a 5th-round draft pick and Damone Clark, who's bad. And their other linebacker is Marquise Bell, who's a converted safety, is 200 pounds. What Matt LaFleur did in that game was I'm just going to come out and play 12 personnel, and you have to put these guys on the field. You have to put them on the field. And they did. And those dudes were in hell like the entire game, particularly in the second half of that game. They were real bad. But you can't do that against the 49ers. Like the 49ers have the best off-ball linebacker in the NFL. And then what's funny is we tie it back to the Ravens too. Like the Ravens have a really good off-ball linebacker too. So it's like interesting. The off-ball linebacker might not be as dead as, people want it to be, like the running back position.
The 49ers, Dre Greenlaw is dealing with an injury. I don't think he practiced on Wednesday, but you're right. And so if they have him too, I mean, like, yeah, it's that combo is as good as the Ravens combo. It is an interesting kind of the ebbs and flows of it, because it's maybe not that the off-ball linebacker is dead, it's what you're asking them to do
Yeah.
has changed. And so as long as you have those guys who can flow and then get back in coverage, then that is a much more effective. And we're going to see that in the Bills game, I think, based on the injuries that they have. We can talk about that later. But based on the injuries that they have at linebacker, we saw what the Steelers were able to do to kind of get Deontay Johnson specifically into space around the middle of the field. He was able to create yards after catch, and they were able to move the ball with Mason Rudolph, right? And now they're going to face Patrick Mahomes. And so, yeah, it's certainly a storyline that is going to be important as we go through these playoffs. The 49ers receivers, I mean, you mentioned how many guys they have. Is there any signal pointing to Debo, to Kittle, to Ayuk, or are we just kind of flipping a coin as we normally do?
I mean, it all depends on what Joe Barry does, right? Like we've seen the
Yeah.
49ers. The one thing that makes them hard from like a stacking purpose always is the course of the season is that none of these guys are going to get value. Like no one's really pushing double-digit targets on a regular basis. These guys have to be efficient, and part of the reason they don't get value is they all are so good and they all are efficient. That there's definitely some symmetry there. If they're going to play, if the Packers want to drop back and play like a lot of zone coverage, that favors Debo, who's had like the massive splits versus man and versus zone. If they're going to play a lot of cover 3, cover 1, which is what they've done in bulk this season, that favors Ayuk and Kittle. It just all depends on what they want to do. And listen, I don't know what Joe Barry is really going to attempt to do to slow this down, but I will say they're damned if they do, damned if they don't, matter what they do. This team is, like I said, it's outside of the Ravens. The Ravens are the only team at full strength that have slowed this offense down.
Yeah, and they, as we talked about in the last game, have one of the best defenses in the league. So there we are. It's gonna be a tough situation. I feel like we glossed over a little bit the Jordan Love. I do want to make a point that what we saw from Jordan Love last week was not a fluke. I mean, we had doubts about Jordan Love because, as I mentioned at the top, he had struggled in some very specific areas that we thought that the Cowboys would be able to take advantage of. And last week, he did not struggle in those areas. And other than those areas, he had been amazing. Since week 11, you had it in your worksheet. He's only behind Brock Purdy in quarterback rating, 21 touchdowns to 1 interception. So, I mean, he's been on fire. He's been outstanding. It wasn't a fluke what we saw last week. Maybe the Packers aren't going to be able to win this game, but it's not going to be because of Jordan Love, I would imagine, based on the play that we've seen over this back half of the season.
Yeah, it was the highest game in EPA per dropback for a quarterback in the playoffs since Peyton Manning in 2003. Like just a pretty, just absolutely
not a bad
game.
list.
Yeah,
Not a bad list to be a part of.
It's only be behind him, but yeah, like I say, if you're a Packers fan, you just got to feel really good about how the back half of the season's gone. Not just from Love's play, but from a coaching perspective, right? Like even Joe Barry, like Packers fans have been, in and out on Joe Barry off and on, and he's done a really good job, especially the past month. But the way Matt LaFleur has just been able to calibrate this offense, from Jordan Love, from going like the front half of the year was just a downfield, relying on inefficient types of throws, and then they kind of get the quick passing game going, and it gives Love confidence. It's made the downfield passing game better. He can win out of structure. And we've seen Love versus like a guy like Tua, like just in the modern NFL, like you have to be able to win when the play doesn't work. And Love has shown that. Love has that ability to win when the play doesn't work. And that's huge. And it's going to be huge for this game because, I mean, the 49ers they've had a couple more flibs. Like we talked about them versus the Ravens defense. Like the 49ers still on paper, like this is a unit. Like they have stars everywhere on every level defensively, but they have had a couple more softer spots during the course of the season, against Burrow, against Kirk Cousins, against Lamar. Like they've had some spots where at least like the defense has been, it hasn't been played up to like the caliber of player that they have. At least they've given you more softer spots where you're like, this could happen for Love. Whereas it's harder for me to say like it could happen for Stroud because the Ravens haven't had those lapses. And that's the key to the game, right? Like you get a couple turnovers from Purdy and then Love is still, it just keeps this immense heater going.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a reason this game has the highest total of the weekend, is because I do think the Packers offense can find success with the way Love's playing. Aaron Jones is back to being the Aaron Jones that you and I both fell in love with at UTEP. He is back to being that kind of explosive running back. I think you had in there, he had 17 runs of 10 or more yards over the last 4 games. So Aaron Jones is back to being really good. And so that helps, obviously. And then the receiving core, it's hard from a fantasy perspective with the Packers to pick out what receiver is going to have a big game. But as a whole, kind of functioning together, this receiving core has been very good, almost no matter who they
Mm-hmm.
put in there. I am really interested with Watson, with Christian Watson now another week removed from injury. We have a history here with him. That first game back from injury being very limited, and then him increasing how much he's used. I think that's probably what we'll see. That might be at the expense of Dontavian Wicks, and I don't know if that's the best thing, because Wicks has been awesome. Maybe are they going to use as much 12 personnel this week? That seemed to be a point of emphasis last week, as we discussed. So if they don't, are we going to get a bounce back game from Jaden Reed? Like, it's really hard to kind of see where if Jordan Love has a decent game, if let's say he throws for 275 yards and 2 touchdowns, where are those yards and touchdowns going? It's really tough to kind of decipher who's going to be the wide receiver you need in DFS.
Yeah, last week they all played, and it's the same thing. That's why Packers feel good. It's like they've had to rotate these guys in and out, and they're all young players. And no matter who they've called upon, like they've answered the call. Whether it be Wicks, whether it be Jaden Reed, whether it be Bo Melton, even the little bit he got to play,
Yeah.
Tucker Kraft filling in for Luke Musgrave, like all of these guys have produced. But we also saw even last week on Jordan Love's dropbacks, like all of these guys play too. Like I've never seen like a team that just constantly rotates dudes in and out like this. And we'll see how static it is. Like you said, Watson has a history of this where, and also with like all the chips on the table, if Christian Watson's healthy, like he's the kind of talent to maybe win you a game like this, right? Like when you are a huge Christian Watson is still the most talented wide receiver they have, like in terms of raw talent. Like this, you have a 6'4" wide receiver that runs a 4.3 40. Like he's got a trump card. He has an actual spade that could win you a game where you're a 10-point dog on the road, right? Especially against the 49ers, who have given some stuff up vertically and downfield. So it exists if he's going to get closer to like a 75%, 80% route participation, that like he would be a guy they have to at least put on the field. We'll see, like, again, who's at the expense of. There's a little bit of guesswork there. I mean, it would probably be Wicks. Jaden Reed, again, we've seen, like, he only plays in 11 personnel. That's, like, the one problem with him. You know, a lot of people that chase, like, either props on him or anything, like, you're always going to be at the mercy that Jaden Reed just doesn't play when there's two wide receivers on the field usually. So that's kind of the one problem you always have there from a DFS perspective and from, like, a player prop perspective. He's been great when on the field, but you're not always guaranteed he's going to be on the field. And he ran fewer pass routes than even Dontavian Wicks last week.
Yeah. As someone who had Reed instead of Jones in my main FFPC playoff lineup, that would be in great position. Otherwise, I'm not having a great week. There were tears shed. There weren't actually tears shed. I thought about crying over over Reed over Aaron Jones. Let's move on to the next game here. The Bucs at the Lions. Lions 6.5-point favorites. The total's 48.5. Right out of the jump, I just want to say this total looks really low to me. Does it look low to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think we thought that last week too with the Rams, and we should have gotten there. Thanks, Sean McVay. In Detroit. But I mean, it's just literally everything we've done with with these two teams kind of towards the end of the season, right? Like we've been targeting Lions overs and Bucks overs for months. Now we have one. It might be some box score like hunting from earlier in the season. These teams only scored 26 points, but I think under the hood, there was an avenue for a lot more points to be scored in that game. So it does feel light to me as well.
Yeah, I this is a game that I think is going to go over. And so I'm going to play it as if this game should be the highest total game of the week to me. And so when I'm playing DFS, I'm going to be playing it that way. That this the game is the highest total. I don't think that that's necessarily contrarian. I assume most people will be really interested in this game. I'm just saying, if you're thinking about this game, that this total is low, and I'm going to bump it up in the way that I'm thinking about DFS, just kind of from my perspective. One of the reasons is that Baker Mayfield looked healthier last week than we had seen over the final 2 games. One of the reasons I thought the Eagles might still kind of squeak through is because the Baker Mayfield we saw in week 17 and 18 wasn't able to kind of run that offense. That was not the case last week. And obviously the Eagles helped with their unwillingness to tackle anybody. So that certainly helped. But this Lions defense also is not good. I mean, this Lions defense still gave up 7.7 yards per play to the Rams last week, gave up a massive game to Stafford and to Puka Nakua. And so if Baker is what we saw last week and maybe even a healthier version of that, then we've seen him this year be able to take advantage of these types of matchups. And I think we're going to see a pretty big game from this Bucks passing game.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and well, Baker was throwing beams on Monday night, and if some guys would catch the ball, he would have had a huge, bigger game. And he was still
Please catch the ball, Mike Evans.
the
Oh
first
my
guy
goodness.
to still in the playoffs. So the Bucks have 300 passing yards, I think 3 passing touchdowns in the same game. So listen, yeah, and when these teams played earlier in the year, it was just one of 2 games the Bucks didn't score a touchdown. We're in a similar spot last week because like the Bucks didn't play good against the Eagles the first game. Obviously, they were catching a softer Eagles defense in the rematch, and they absolutely took advantage of that. That's the case again this week. I mean, since these teams have played, the Lions have been absolutely dreadful. They've allowed the highest yards per pass attempt in the league since these teams played. They're 31st in passing yards allowed per game. They're 29th in touchdown rate. They're second in the NFL in most fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks over that span. The past month, they've allowed over 300 yards and multiple passing touchdowns to guys like Nick Mullins threw for 400 yards in 2 games against them. Dak Prescott 345, Stafford 367. And what it all comes back to with the Lions is they should think about being worse against the run. They should really think about it. Like, just let some teams run a little better against them. Nobody can run the ball.
We've talked about this before. It's the Brandon Staley Rams.
Yes.
The Brandon Staley Rams were like, no, just run. That's fine. We're okay with that. Just keep running the ball. The Lions, yeah, you're right. Maybe they should think about that.
The Lions are so damn good against the run. No running backs run for 70 yards in a game against them this year. But it just forces team to throw against them. And the worst part of their team is that secondary. Like, that secondary is getting absolutely chewed up. And they're so good against the run. It funnels everybody to throw against them. We're probably going to see, just through game script, obviously, throws against her. We did see Dave Canales actually be aggressive against the Eagles too last week for like the first time in a long time. So
it's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. So like I figure the Bucks are going to come out and throw the football here. I mean, and like you said, I'm glad you brought up Mike Evans too, because Chris Godwin has out targeted Mike Evans, over the past, several weeks since the Instagram dropped, where his wife, dropped the gram. But it's not like
that. We were on that, by the way. We were on that narrative street that week. Like that's one of the few narrative streets that we went, oh no, I'm in on this one, and we were on it that week. So I'm real proud of us, our Instagram snooping abilities. I'm real proud of that.
I mean, but all of the signal here would be where the Lions are getting like absolutely destroyed on these vertical targets and outside receivers for it to be a spot where Evans to kind of come back and have one of his really good games. And I know he didn't have, if you go back again to the box score, no Bucks had real big games. I mean, he was wide open for a 90-yard touchdown on the one interception Baker threw. It was tipped at the line of scrimmage. He was throwing it to Evans. Evans was complete. It was a missed coverage. It was a blown coverage. He was going to coast in. Granted, if he caught the ball, he was going to coast in for 90 yards. I mean, you look at, since these teams have played again, I mean, the Lions have allowed their 27th in receptions allowed per game to wide receivers. They've had a league high 202 receiving yards per game to wide receivers, 30th in touchdowns per game allowed to wide receivers. And they're giving up big play touchdowns. We saw it again with Puka last week, but over the past month, they've allowed touchdowns of 38, 50, 42, 38, 92, and 26 yards to wide receivers, all shot plays from outside the red zone. So I think it is a good spot for bounce back, Mike Evans here for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything kind of points towards him being able to have a good game. And obviously Rachaad White, you kind of made mention of how good the Lions are against the run. If Rachaad White's going to get there in this game, it's going to be he scores a touchdown or he gets more involved in the passing game for sure. And so we'll see if he's able to do that. We'll see if they look to get him involved more there. On the other side, if we're talking about running games, the Lions running game versus the Bucks run defense is a real strength on strength kind of situation. The Lions have run the ball on good run defenses. We saw them be able to run the ball on against the Bears. They were confined 5.5 yards per carry against the Bears, but volume made kind of their counting stats look better against the Vikings. They weren't great in that game. So if you kind of look at the run defenses they played, it's kind of been hit or miss against these good defenses. So I'm interested in how much success the Lions really have in the run game. And how much are they going to be committed to it? We know if they're leading in the second half, they're going to run the football. That's what they do. That's what allowed the Rams to come back last week. That's one of the things I wish they and the Bills come to mind here wouldn't do. Keep your foot on the gas and go. But I don't know how much success per carry they're going to have in this game, despite how good their running backs are.
Yeah, that's what makes this game so fun. And the Lions have run against, good teams over the course of the season. So like this run game's been good when they have both Gibbs and Montgomery available. And they did not the first time these teams played. But this Bucs defense has literally held up against the run all year. I mean, they're top 10 in yards per carry. They've tied for the fewest rushing touchdowns. A lot of the running backs, like they're going to make at least this Lions backfield work. And I think a lot, again, is just going to fall into where we have a real high back and forth, passing game. Where the Lions have to be more aggressive than they've probably been. They almost let the Rams, like I said, like you talk about, like almost hang around in that game because they were just getting inefficient runs in the second half of that game. But that just ties back into, Jared Goff. And like, I purposely didn't even write any home road splits for Jared Goff because there's definitely merit to like Goff on the road in bad weather, right? Like that, there's definitely merit to like his style of play and like in his hand size and all that stuff that he's not functional in bad weather. But I purposely didn't write it up because all that matters for Jared Goff over the course of his career is can you disrupt him and can you not? And it's the same thing during that game against the Rams. We saw it again. When the Rams, the very little pressure they could get on Jared Goff, we saw it. The same thing. Jared Goff, when you move him off his spot, he's not a good quarterback. He needs the play to succeed, to win. And he was 19 of 19 passing when the Rams didn't get pressure on him. When these teams played in week 6, because the one thing is we know Todd Bowles is going to try. He's at least going to try to disrupt Jared Goff. Can he be more successful than they were in week 6? Can they find a way for these blitzes to get home? Because they only pressured Goff on 27% of his dropbacks in that game. Goff had just one game with a lower pressure rate all season. And they tried to blitz him. They blitzed him 38% of the time, but they only got home with 27% of their blitzes. It was 25th that week in the NFL. For some context, they got pressure on 55% of their blitzes against Jalen Hurts on Monday night. So they're going to have to find a way to disrupt Goff. That's the key to the game. This is the whole key to the Lions' existence, right? And it's why people can talk about when they eventually maybe have to move off of Goff when this roster is completely in place, because Goff wins when the play wins. But if you can disrupt Jared Goff, that's when this offense starts to look a little shaky.
Yeah, and I think that if you look at how successful the Bucs have been blitzing and just kind of Todd Bowles' history, that Lions game feels like something of an outlier. So I don't know if we can go into this expecting the Lions are going to be able to handle it as well. And you mentioned the blitz was very effective for the Bucs against the Eagles on Monday night.
Who had no plan.
4.6 yards per attempt.
Plan for. Looked like they never.
How is Nick Sirianni? That whole coaching staff. So Tucker Bagley, who I do the Sunday recap show, a couple of weeks ago brought up the idea of Nick Sirianni being fired. And I was like, I mean, he was at the Super Bowl last year. That's probably not happening. But watching that Bucs game and just the complete lack of plan for something you knew was going to happen against a Todd Bowles team was wild and shows like a complete lack of kind of coaching hierarchy. Also hiring Matt Patricia. That's a problem as well. Yeah, that whole situation is interesting. And I don't think we've heard the last of kind of what's going on with Philadelphia. Like the reports were kind of like recording this on Thursday morning. The reports after he had his meeting was like, okay, Nick Sirianni's going to stick around. They're going to make some coaching changes. I didn't read the reports that way. Like I'm really interested kind of in how we see that happen.
I mean, the Cowboys got dismantled, but like the Eagles just flat out didn't play. Like
that's
their loss was worse than the Cowboys.
I
mean, I guess you could say the Cowboys' loss was worse. But like in context, like the Cowboys tried and like they still fought tooth and nail to at least even make that respectable in garbage time, right? Like the Eagles quit on Monday. It was a quiet quit. That was as much evidence as an NFL quiet quit we've ever seen.
Yeah, it was. No, that's not true. You've already forgotten about the Chargers Thursday night game.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, that was factual.
That was the. That was what a team quitting looks like. But no,
O'Connell.
Yeah, that's a rough, tough scenes. But yeah, no, I think that is, you're right. Getting back to the Lions, that's a key. Can they disrupt Goff? If they can, it's gonna be tough. But if they can, that they're in this game. Of all of the kind of three big underdogs, and obviously the Bucks are 6.5 point underdogs, where the Texans and Packers are 9.5. So saying this isn't, like a groundbreaking thing. But when I look at those three teams, the Bucks are the most, by far to me, more than kind of the 3 points would indicate, the most live of those three dogs. Like that, if the Bucks win this game, I would not be surprised, because I think that the Lions have some fatal flaws. Most notably, their fatal flaws on defense that is going to bring their season crashing down at some point, whether that is this week against the Bucks or whether that is next week against the 49ers. Their defense is going to be the reason they struggle. And if Goff gets pressured, maybe has turnover issues as we saw early in the season, that is another one that could happen in this game. There are two outs here for the Bucks, and so I look at this 6.5. I think it's too much. You talked about teasing the two Saturday teams. Like if you want to put the Bucks in that and take the Bucks up to 12.5, or if you want to do a 7-point tease, take them up to 13.5, so you can get the 49ers and the Ravens down to 2.5, then that makes a lot of sense to me. I think that hits. I don't think the Bucks are getting blown out in this game. And even if they are, they're going to be able to close the gap in the second half, because the Lions will run the ball and the Bucks can have success passing. So I like that 6.5 number a lot here for Tampa Bay. The final game we have here, Chiefs at Bills, Sunday night. They gave us the game that we wanted to see on Sunday night. Bills 2.5-point favorites, total 45.5, which, can you imagine going back to last year and saying the Bills and Chiefs are going to play a football game and the total is going to be 45.5? Like, would you have believed that? You'd slam the over. Last year, what did this total have been? 54? Like, we are in a really odd place with these two teams and kind of what we've come to expect from them. I think the Buffalo offense is the more interesting one to talk about, because of both how streaky they've been and how good the Chiefs defense has been. And when I look at this, the Bills offense, and I've been higher on the Bills than most people over this kind of second half run, but this looks like the kind of matchup that could really give the Bills offense a lot of trouble, based on the Chiefs' ability to shut down Stephon Diggs, and based on the Bills not leaning into James Cook in their first matchup and almost losing to the Chiefs in that matchup in a game based on how it started they never should have lost. So I am a little bit worried about kind of the Buffalo offense here.
Yeah, I mean, we see this game play out. This is another one. 3 of these 4 games are rematches from the regular season. This is the most recent one that's fresher in our mind. These teams played in week 14, relatively recently, and a lot of things that are largely the same, except for we'll get to the Bills defense. But we saw the Bills came out.
I want to make it. Sorry, I want to break in here, because I might have sounded like I said the Bills lost this game. They didn't lose this game. They beat the Chiefs. I want to make that clear. But that game was closer, I think, than it should have been based on kind of what we saw. Sorry, I wanted to correct myself, for some Bills fans threw a table at me.
Yeah, I mean, they were good. They opened this game hot. They scored 2 touchdowns on their opening 3 drives, and then didn't score another touchdown the rest of the game, right? And again, we've talked about it ad nauseum. This Chiefs defense, this is the best defense they've had in the Mahomes era by far. It's easily the best defense they had. They absolutely shut down Josh Allen. Like I said, I think the Bills did some helping of them by getting Ty Johnson and Latavius Murray on the field more than they should have in that game, when James Cook was literally the reason they were up and ahead in that game. And I think the Bills are just streaky in general because they don't have consistent playmakers, right? Like their star asset on offense, Stephon Diggs, has been gone for the last 3 months. I mean, this guy, he's averaging 50 yards receiving per game the past 12 weeks. And teams are able to take him away, though, too. Like, it's not just all Stephon Diggs' fault. It's that the Bills, like ancillary guys, too, haven't really pumped up. We've seen Kincaid the last 3 games. They finally got religion and started to use him downfield instead of near the line of scrimmage. But, guys like Gabe Davis, like Khalil Shakur in the backfield, like consistently haven't been there all season. And that's what the Chiefs are going to make you do, because no wide receiver has done well against the Chiefs. No lead wide receiver the entire season. I mean, the most yards they've allowed to lead wide receiver is 73 yards, and they faced Tyreek Hill twice. They faced Devontae Adams twice. They faced A.J. Brown. They faced Justin Jefferson. They faced Amon-Ra St. Brown. They faced Keenan Allen. They faced Jamar Chase. None of these guys have gone over. And Stephon Diggs is already in this little bit of something. Oh, they also face Stephon Diggs himself, who only had 24 yards in this matchup as well, has only gone over 70 yards in this matchup in 2 of 6 games. So they're going to, like, the other Bills guys are going to have to do something in this game, whether it be Shakir, whether it be Kincaid. And I think it's hard to objectively find avenues for the pass catchers to get over. James Cook is the guy that has to be. And it feels weird again, like we're in the second game of the 4. We're like, hey, it has to be this running back. But you can use James Cook as a receiver too, and they've gotten away from that. The past month, where has he been as a pass catcher? He has 17 receiving yards the past 4 games. Where is this stuff that they were doing fun with James Cook when Joe Brady took over? He's not getting any downfield targets. He's not running these, wide receiver or corner routes coming out of the backfield, like where he scored against the Cowboys against. He ran like a seam route in this game for a touchdown earlier in the season. Like, where is that usage? Where's the creative James Cook usage? It's evaporated. That has to be here in this game because the Chiefs defense is too good for you to line up and just play your base offense against.
Yeah, and I mean, Gabe Davis, DNP on Wednesday, and even if Gabe Davis plays, you're not feeling great about that. I think you laid out the 2 key points. Kincaid down the field, taking advantage of that and making that a weapon, a threat to the defense is something that's really important for them, and they have been doing it to your point. And then Cook, you just have to lean into Cook. They did lean into him last week. They didn't get him involved in the receiving game, but they did give him a ton of touches. I mean, we did still see Ty Johnson closing out the game, which I wasn't super thrilled about. But we did see Cook get involved. Maybe that was more game script than anything, that he wasn't involved in the receiving game. We see more of it this week. But they have to get those secondary pieces going because otherwise they're just going to take away Diggs with Snead. That's just what's going to happen. Maybe Snead has a big play. Maybe Diggs has a big play, a big game. Stephon Diggs is still Stephon Diggs. He's still very good. We saw Tyreek Hill be able to get down the field for his long touchdown last week. But the most likely outcome here is Diggs is going to struggle to put up big numbers as he has done the last several months, which means the Bills need that secondary option to show up. And it means they need to use their secondary options correctly to put them in those positions. And the unfortunate part is before the last 3 weeks with Kincaid and then over like the last month with Cook, we haven't been given a lot of reason for hope and optimism that they are going to do that. And so that's really where my big concern for this Buffalo offense comes from.
Yeah, to me, this has to be like a massive Josh Allen game. And like asking Josh Allen to win this game it's in the realm of probability. Like, it can happen. Like Josh Allen's that good. But also, like,
he could fake slide and then go for 52 yards and a touchdown. That certainly could happen.
I'm also just worried in general, though, that like it's like highly probable. It exists, but is it highly probable? Like, he can, like, I think the Chiefs can win this game with a pedestrian Mahomes game more than the Bills can win this game with a pedestrian Allen game, even though they already did it once.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. Allen has to be very good for this offense to work. Because on the other side, if we're going to go to the Chiefs side, this Bills defense, and they've been able to fight through adversity over and over and over and over again, fight through injuries over and over again. But we saw at the end of the Steelers game, we might be reaching the tipping point for Bills defensive injuries because we saw the Steelers be able to move the ball, as I kind of mentioned earlier in the podcast. And if we look at the injury report for the Bills, players that did not practice on Wednesday, Terrell Bernard, Taylor Rapp, Christian Benford. Players that were limited on Wednesday, Terrell Dotson and Taron Johnson. This whole kind of defense outside of the defensive line is just banged up and super injured. And it's really going to be really tough against Mahomes if they don't have those guys. If they're relying on backup linebackers, so they're relying on AJ Klein in this situation, it's going to be rough against Mahomes.
I mean, and paired with the shorter week, that game getting moved to Monday helped the Bills and hurt them at the same time, right? Like, they have one fewer day off now to get these guys back on the field. You have one fewer day off for Taron Johnson to clear concussion protocol. You have now 2 fewer days off than the Chiefs had, who played on Saturday. And, the Chiefs, obviously, historically great team with rest advantage under Andy Reid. The Bills, luckily, have been good with a rest disadvantage under Sean McDermott, but it's just another variable, right, to throw in, like another negative to throw in on the Bills side. And they definitely deserve to be favorites here. I get why they're favorites here. I definitely am taking the Chiefs to win this game outright. So Bills fans can come and hate me. I was wrong with the Packers last week, so you can say I'm just an idiot. But it eventually, like you said, there's just too many guys. Like, when do you hit the breaking point of missing players defensively? And the one thing that's been able to hold the Bills together is they've been able to get a pass rush still, and it is largely intact, their defensive line. And even when you go back to when these teams played in week 14, there were significant splits when they were able to get pressure on Mahomes and when they weren't. How he performed in that game. And I have a lot of those numbers, in the worksheet game. This game is free too. You can read this game in detail. But eventually, like you said, like, when is it just enough's enough? Like, they've lost too many guys.
We actually have a comment here from Clayton, who first of all says it wasn't a fake slide. I was joking. I don't think it was a fake slide either. Please, Bills fans, do not throw tables at me. But he thinks that it's a system and it's plug and play. And Clayton might be right, because the history that we have here with this team throughout the entire season, we've seen them lose very important defensive players, more important defensive players than they lost even last week with Tre'Davious White and with Matt Milano. And the defense has worked. It has continued to work because, as Clayton says, it is a system, and that's true. But we did see cracks at the end of that game last week, and that has me at least a little bit concerned. And again, Clayton could be right. It could just be that this system is that good and it's going to be plug and play. But there has to be a point. If I was out there on the field, like, if we take it to its logical extreme, if I'm out there on the field huffing and puffing and not being able to run, then I'm going to get destroyed by Patrick Mahomes. And so there's obviously a point that we get to from a talent perspective where maybe it's not going to work.
Well, structurally,
it
matters. Like, those players matter. And we saw with Jerome Baker out last week, and, without Van Ginkel, I mean, Mahomes attacked the middle of the field. He was 17 of 23 passing over the middle of the field between the numbers. When these teams played earlier in the year, Mahomes did nothing between the numbers. He was 9 of 15, only 6 yards per pass attempt. He threw 22 passes outside the numbers of the sideline, the most he has in a game this season. I can guarantee you, if Bernard's out, if Taron Johnson can't play, like, the ball is going over, is good. They're going to be throwing to the middle of the field in this game.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you look at the way that the Chiefs have run their offense the last couple of weeks when they've been playing their starters. We heard Andy Reid say, we even talked about it on this podcast, and Andy Reid talked about shortening the offense, kind of condensing the offense, and that is 100% what they've done. We had 24 carries for Pacheco last week. We had 22 targets for Kelce and Rice combined. Kelce and Rice can work in those areas of the field. Pacheco has been used as a receiver. The weapons that they're choosing to target, the ones that they're choosing to lean on, can be used in those areas of the field. And so we could see, Mahomes really lean into that again if we see these kind of injuries go through. So you're taking the Chiefs in this game?
Yeah.
Like, you're dead set.
I am taking the Chiefs in this game, yeah. I mean, the playoff Mahomes getting points,
yeah, I'm really, like, I continue to be, you've said this before, and you've said this before, I continue to be unimpressed with this offense and think that it's going to come back to bite them at some point. And so I've been on it all season.
I don't think they score 30 points. Tough. I'm definitely not expecting them to score 30 points in this game. This is another game. It's still, even at 46.5, is too high.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that I mentioned at the top, is that last year this total would have been 53, 54. And now I look at 45.5 and I'm like, yeah, it might be even a little high. So as long as it's lower scoring, that adds variance. It adds the opportunity for Josh Allen to just do Superman things, which we know that Josh Allen can do. And so I'm not so sold on the Chiefs here. I think I would pick the Bills at home to kind of finally break through this Chiefs barrier, and get to the AFC Championship game, where they might go up against a really good Ravens team, and that would be unfortunate for the Bills to finally beat the Chiefs and then go and run into the Ravens. But yeah, it's a close game. It is a real 2.5 point game. Yeah, that'd be. I mean,
tough. Eventually, in the rivalry, because these teams are 3-3, but the Bills haven't beaten them in the playoffs. So, like, it is huge for the Bills to actually to have a season not end against the Chiefs. And I know that they're happy to have this game, at home for the first time of the two that they've lost. We're in Arrowhead. Obviously, this is the 7th time they've played, and it's only the 2nd time they've played in Buffalo in that whole sample.
It's weird scheduling quirk. We had that for a while with the Manning Colts and the Patriots and the Brady Patriots. We had that for a while where it was for some reason it was just it really leaned to, I think, the Patriots. They played in Foxborough way more than they played in Indy. Another comment here from Mason. Pacheco was out when they played earlier in the season. So I think they're going to lean on the physical game, lean heavily on the run. And that could be true. But the one thing about this Bills, even with the injuries, if we're worried about the injuries, this Bills front is still good. And this Bills run defense, after that kind of odd start to the season, we remember that game when Brees Hall kind of had his big plays and things like that. After that start to the season, this Bills run defense has been very consistently good over the second half of the year. I know you had some stats about that in your worksheet preview for
Yeah, like
this.
I said, that one's free. You can go in and check it out. But I mean, obviously, we know Pacheco's going to get the ton of volume. He's had over 20 touches every game without
Absolutely.
Jerick McKinnon. Like they're going to try. I mean, that's who the Chiefs are. We've talked about it. I have again thrown out the window, like expecting the Chiefs to turn into like some kind of offensive behemoth. Like that's not going to happen. But we have seen them become a more efficient offense the last few games we've seen them. And I think that given the Bills' injuries and where they're kind of could be vulnerable here, that we see something similar. I think this game's in the low to mid 20s for sure. I think it's another like 23-20 game in either direction, a 24-21 type of game. I think it's what we're looking at.
I hope so because we need a good game. I don't have a lot of faith in the Saturday games, and so I'm really hoping we get a good Sunday night game with the Chiefs and the
Could be
Bills.
another one of
All
those where
right,
the two
that's it for
Sunday
us.
the Sunday games are just tight and fun.
Yeah, that would be a good time. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that for sure. We actually will have an episode of this podcast after Chiefs and Bills. Right after Chiefs and Bills is finished, we will record a recap for the divisional round. Myself, Tucker Bagley, and Curtis Hirsch. So make sure you check that out. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're listening to this as a podcast. First of all, we appreciate that. But we do this live every single Thursday at 11:30 Eastern. Check us out there. Remember, we have our postseason package on sale. If you use the promo code playoffs, you can get 50% off either our weekly or full postseason page. If you do that, you can read all of Rich's worksheet previews. The one for the Chiefs and the Bills, like he said, is free. So go and check that one out and see what you get with that. And that's about it for us. Thank you. We'll talk to you next week.